It's now time for our Outside the Pegs interview, and we've got a bona fide legend of sidecar Grasstrack racing with us. And we throw the term legend around a lot these days, but it really is apt for this gentleman. He's a 3 times British Masters champion, and he won it back-to-back in 87, 88 and 89. He's a 3 times Ace of Aces champion, and he was one of the sport's biggest stars throughout the 80s, certainly while I was growing up and while lots of our listeners were growing up. So joining me today is Steve Dewison. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the Grasstrack Banter podcast.
Hi Gareth, thanks very much for contacting me, and it'd be lovely to talk to you.
Absolutely. I mean, the sort of, first of all, the first thing we'll talk about, I think, the reason why I got in touch with you really, aside of the fact that you were on our list from day one, sadly we lost your long-time passenger and a great friend to you, Dave Ward, quite recently. So for those of us that remember yourself and Dave racing, you were a tremendous sidecar crew to watch, and you had supporters all over the country. So you must have some really fond memories of your racing time with Dave.
Yes, it was a great time during our career, and we obviously decided to stop racing as a pair, as a team, and but we had, I think, probably 7 years together, so that was really good, and they were obviously very successful years.
Yeah, really successful. I mean, how did it all come about? Because lots of us know that before Dave jumped on with you, he was riding, and very successfully riding, with Ted Tucker, being the first British Masters champion. How did he end up on the back of you?
Well, it was coincidence, really. I think what happened was that I think Ted was losing a little bit of interest, but still racing, and Dave, I think, was looking for a competitive ride, and I was passengerless at the time. I didn't have a permanent passenger, so to speak, and we met by chance at a motor show. He was representing Coney because he worked for, I think, John Banks, who imported Coneys, and he was running a stand there, and I just noticed him, and we had a chat, and then we had a drink after the exhibition, and we agreed that it would be a good idea to get together as a team. And that happened about a year later, so it wasn't immediate, but it was something that I was pleased to do because I needed to really get consistency in my racing, and the bike was running really well, but you just need to have one passenger, as you're probably well aware,
yeah.
and so that you can concentrate on improving the team and riding together. And so obviously when we did finally get together, it was good, because immediately I had a top class passenger to help me achieve what I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, and I think he was a brilliant passenger, wasn't he? I don't know how quickly you guys sort of got together. We talk about driver and passenger gelling, but some of the photos you see of him on the back of Ted, and then some of the photos on the back of you, he was athletic, he was everything you wanted really from a passenger, I think.
Yeah, he was the ideal package, really. I mean, he's a small guy, but very agile and very strong, so whatever we needed to do, we could do, and we very quickly gelled, and we started winning almost immediately as soon as he came on board. He possessed the ability to understand exactly what I was trying to achieve, but always in the background. He was never sort of in your face as a passenger. He just quietly did the job, and it worked every time. To be honest, I knew he would be doing a good job, and I didn't even really notice him on the back. If you understand what I mean, he was just he just did the right things, and the bike performed, and we had the success mainly through that.
Yeah, every driver that talks highly of their passenger, the biggest compliment I think they can pay is, I don't know what, he didn't even feel him or didn't know he was there.
Well, that's right. They're doing exactly the right thing, and know what to do to make sure we do win. Obviously, a driver can only steer and open the throttle, can't he? So it's down to the passenger to make sure he's getting the weight in the right place and making the bike perform.
Yeah, and he was one of the best, and still remains to this day as one of the best. And I'm sure that as we sort of start to pick your career apart, he's going to come up an awful lot. But Before Dave came on board, you were racing for probably about 10 years, I think, before Dave came on board. And we were just talking before about, I didn't realise that how close you'd come to a British Championship in 1976 as well. So how did it all begin for you? How did your Grasstrack career begin?
Well, I knew Clyde Cardy, who raced thousands at the time, and then went on to race 500s, and obviously was a multiple British champion in 500s. And he used to live fairly local to me, and he used to go in the same pub as I went into. And I got chatting to him, and he said, well, come along and watch some racing. And I did. And shortly after that, I started following him and then became his mechanic for a number of years. And Clyde really got me interested in sidecars. And we continued, obviously, that friendship after that period right the way through. And he built me. He built 2 bikes for me through the early years. And that's where I had my early successes. And obviously, he was the guy who built the first, or the drifter, the one that won the championships. He built the first one of those. So he's a very clever guy, and he got me into it. And after a few years of mechanicking for him, I decided to try it myself. And then that was in '72. Actually, I did race for about 5 or 6 meetings in '72. On a Johnny Bryant. I don't know if you remember or have heard of Johnny Bryant. He was a southeastern sidecar racer, and he used to build frames that were called none such frames. And in my first ever meeting, I actually managed a third in the final, and that was Johnny Bryant won that race actually, and I can't remember who was second. I think it might have been Steve Todd's dad, Ron Todd. I came third, so I was very pleased with that. And that was really the time when I thought, well, I really would like to do this in the future, but I just didn't have the money. So I sold the outfit towards the end of the season. And the following year, I went to Germany, lived in Germany for a few years, and came back in 1975. And Clyde built me the first drifter. And that was a supercharged drifter, 650 Triumph supercharged engine, and the following year was when we managed a third place in the British Championships, which was in Braintree at the time. Yeah. So it was a fairly local meeting for me. So that was very pleasing, and that was behind Ted Scott and Steve Smith. We managed then to race in the Eastern Centre extensively, South Eastern Centre a little bit, and also the Midland Centre, or South Midland Centre, should I say. At the time, you could get meetings without having to go much out of centre.
Yeah.
And we obviously represented the Eastern Centre in the Inter-Centre Championships in the early years, and I won the Eastern Centre Championships a few times. And when I came back in '75, I actually didn't only buy the bike from Clyde, I also bought his engine, his supercharger, and his passenger. I didn't buy his passenger, but his passenger hopped on the back, who was Martin Paul, also another local lad who I knew well. And so we progressed for a few years. Well, it was probably 7 or 8 years, I think Martin rode for me, and to the early 80s. And so that was sort of a local effort, really. And Clyde was always a good friend all through those years. He then built me the second drifter, which was the lightweight one, which everybody remembers as probably the first bike to outfit to not have sidecar suspension. That's something which we deliberately did. We decided to build a lightweight frame, and we based it on the 500s, which at the time Clyde was racing. Yeah. And he had some good knowledge of German frame design, and we decided to integrate it into the thousands. I was concerned at the time because multis were starting to be used, but they were massive engines at the time. The early multi-cylinder engines were very heavy and big. and I was still on twin-cylinder engines, and I thought, well, we need a way to beat them, and to beat them was to keep a very light bike and to minimise on everything. My view is that it's important for a driver and passenger weight to be as close to an outfit's weight so that you can steer the bike. If you have too heavy a bike, quite often the bike was in control and not the passenger and driver.
Yeah. When you look at the pic, I mean, we're I'm skipping around a bit, but it doesn't really matter because we're talking about the bike. But when you look around at sort of 87, the years you won the Masters, really, you look at the other bikes around you, they look nothing like what you're on. And then sort of you get to 1990 and then suddenly your bike's not quite so easy to spot in a group because they've all gone the same way as you. It must have, I don't know how you'd feel about that when you suddenly realise everyone else is doing the same thing that you're doing.
Well, it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, firstly, we had to make it successful, which happened fairly quickly. I can't remember exactly when we first produced the lightweight drifter. I think it must have been in about 82, 83 maybe 83. And so it was obviously a few years before we won the championship, but immediately that bike was very, very fast, and we had some pretty good early success on it. But it was a sensitive bike, and so it meant that it wasn't always so easy to ride. The first drifter for the championships, which was obviously the second drifter, the lightweight one. I built a new bike the following year, but based it on the original drifter. But I built it instead of Clyde.
Right.
But Dave was obviously involved with Coney quite a lot, and also doing shock absorbers for the Honda racing team.
Yeah.
And he said to me, why don't you use the Honda monoshock, 750 monoshock system, because it's all integrated. He said, I understand the suspension systems, and I could produce a shock absorber for it, so we could, it might be the right way to go. And that was absolutely true. I mean, in 1988, the chassis we had, which was a progression from the drifter, and we still called it a drifter, was an incredible frame. It made it so easy to win races, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the first time we brought it out, I think, was Jim Cole's event, Andover event, I think.
Right.
And the headstock was too flimsy. So first, we'd only finished it about 6 hours before then. Got to the meeting, missed practice, but then went out for the fastest lap of the day, and we won that. But the headstock had twisted, so we had to pull it back into shape and went out, and we won our first race, came back in, and the headstock had twisted again, and I said, we can't keep going out. So we didn't race anymore that day, but went back and rebuilt the front diamond with a stronger headstock assembly. But the whole bike was a fantastic bike, and very, very easy to ride. That, of course, compounded our victory in the second year, which is the 88 season.
That sort of period, I think, is the time that most people remember you guys at your best, really. That 87, 88, and obviously there was the Masters wins, but there were so many other, you were a cut above for a lot of the season, I think.
Well, I think it's you have to wind yourself up into these things. I mean, obviously Roger Measor had won the two previous seasons, the 85 and the 86 season, and he was really on top of his form, and he was the guy to beat.
Yeah.
And really, it's just a case of, we knew we were there or thereabouts, but there's a big difference between second and third to becoming first consistently, and we had to sort of work on getting our race strategy right so that we could beat Roger, and that was no mean feat. And but we knew in 86 that we were really knocking on his shirt tails, because we were winning quite a few races instead of him, and we were really chasing him constantly, and or likewise he was chasing us, and so we knew we stood a chance if we kept moving forward, and hence managing to win the first Masters of my career anyway, in '87.
Yeah, it was interesting, I think, because of lots of the things we're saying. I mean, Roger was the man to beat, but Roger, from what I know, I mean, I was very young at the time, but it was all about the power unit he had. He would have been running the V4 Honda at that time. It certainly was a much heavier outfit than you were on, but it had so much power. And then you and Dave were riding something really revolutionary, probably down on power, but something that you could put everywhere. It was a brilliant time, I think, for the sport. And that sort of '87 Masters win was obviously good, and then the '87 Aces, Roger managed to beat you and Dave. But then in '88, I think the sort of things that I've seen of your season there, the machine was on song. But one thing I do know is that the '88 Ace of Aces, which you won, you couldn't get off the gate all day. I don't know if that was something that plagued you with that bike, or if it was just on that day.
Well, I'm trying to remember. It may have been when I was experimenting with the speedway tyre in the back of the bike, and the problem with speedway tyres is on grass, anyway, is getting out of the gate. But once you got out the gate, then they're a fantastic tyre. Yeah. And it might have been that I was running a speedway tyre. To be honest, I can't remember. But a lot of my racing was won from the back.
Yeah.
I was never really a very good gaiter. Most people always manage to get out the gate in front of me.
Yeah.
We did improve, but we were by no means the best. And so I'd learnt to always pick people off and beat people by overtaking them.
Yeah.
And that was nonetheless true with Roger. I mean, a number of times I had to try and come past Roger, which wasn't always easy. I understood how he used to race, and so I changed my style so that I could basically beat him, or play him at his own game, really, and run really close to him. But quite often I run around the outside of him, and he was still a pretty safe driver, but he did like to try and nudge people out the way, or run you wide and things like that. But I deliberately moved all my brake assembly from the right-hand side of the front wheel to the left-hand side, so that I could run really close to his sidecar wheel without worrying about damaging anything on my bike. And that helped. That helped quite.
Poor Dave can take the hit then.
Yeah. Well, usually we used to have to go around the outside of Roger, because it wasn't easy going up the inside, and so we just used to have to keep pushing and pushing around the outside, and he kept on running us wider and wider, which he loved doing.
Yeah.
But I admired Roger. I mean, he obviously in the days when we were aspiring to be champions, he was the man we had to beat, and any time we managed to beat him was a real achievement. So and they were hard won most of the time. So that was good. Then we moved on and won after winning the first championship. Then I think we had the psychological advantage, and we managed to then sort of stay ahead of him most of the time.
Yeah, it was a great rivalry, really good rivalry, and it was a shame when it was over, but it was during a time where there was it was a time where the sport was really growing quicker than it ever had, I think. And, the fact that Roger and yourselves were having such tremendous battles, and Steve Smith obviously was there or thereabouts all the time around that time, and there was a whole load of others, Russell Ing, Ken Lane, a lot of really hard riders. But I think it was, I don't know if you agree, but it was a real sort of golden period in Grasstrack, in as much that you and Dave were suddenly very brightly attired, the bike looked professional, Roger was brightly attired, rustling with his pink and blue. Like suddenly, everything just suddenly became a little bit more professional during that time. And I credit yourselves and Roger and all of those people to that, I think.
Well, it was a lovely time. Obviously, when you're having success, you will always consider that it's the best time ever of racing. But there were a lot of meetings going on. There were a lot of local meetings as well as national meetings, so there's a lot of choice for the spectator, for example. But there were a lot of big events on, and so it was a very exciting period of our lives. And fortunately, it was at the time when we were still young enough to be successful at it and enjoy it. But that's, as you say, that's almost 40 years ago now, isn't it? So it's quite a long time ago, or 35 years ago.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. It's, I do feel like it was a turning point for the sport, and then it sort of pushed on. But 1989 obviously was your third Masters title in a row, and it still stands today, that record. So it's a 30-year-long record now that you and Dave have got. Gareth Winterburn and Liam Brown last year won their second in a row. So we had Liam on the show last week, and he was talking about, that record is what they're aiming for, is to win it 3 times in a row. Would you be sad to see the record go, or is it something you don't really think about?
Well, I think it would be nice to see somebody to equal it at least. Then to go on and beat it, obviously they're then in Bill Evans' territory, because he won it 4 times in succession when the British Championships first started. But that's progress, really. It's probably achievable, I'd have thought, now, for somebody to win more than 3 times, or to win 3 and more, because there's less races now.
Yeah.
So there's a better opportunity to stay dominant for longer, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, these guys, they're racing really fast now, and I suppose because also it's just down to one event, as opposed to two rounds that we used to have, and earlier still back 3 rounds. It's more difficult to make sure you're perfect on the day. The beauty of more than one round is that you could have a slightly off round and still come back and win with the second round.
Yeah.
So I'd have thought that it's less predictable, I would guess, for the guys racing now, managing to pull off a victory. Everything has to be perfect on the day, and they've only got one day to do it.
And it even goes further than that, because they to start with, you just have to get in the top 6, and then the final is the winner takes all final. So it's gone from one extreme to another over the last 30 years, I think.
Well, that's right. It's interesting, I guess, for the spectator, but it's not so good for the driver, who you do as much work as you can, then you say you have a bad gate in the final, and you might end up being in 3rd place and end up 3rd in the championship.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's the way Speedway has gone, and it's sort of the model they've followed from the Speedway. So that's just the way things are now, I suppose.
Yeah, it does. You're absolutely right. It makes it to be a brilliant end to the meeting. But yeah, as a rider, I don't think I would agree with it. But talking of sort of spectacles and spectators enjoying it, the Ace of Aces, obviously, we've briefly mentioned. It was another meeting that you managed to win 3 times. Those meetings were just brilliant, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean the team running the meetings were fantastic. I mean Ian Barclay certainly knew how to put a spectacle on, and he had a great team around him. So I think that it was inevitable that he was the first of the big meetings, really, wasn't he? Apart from maybe the Strongbow internationals that were run prior to that, but certainly the Ace of Aces was a fantastic race, and everybody wanted to win it, of course. yeah,
definitely. I think 91 was one of the best wins you had. Well, 88, your 88 Aces win was good because if you beat Roger. But then 91, I think you'd sort of, Russell Ing looked like he was going to win it all, and then you just popped out the gate in the final, ironically, and won the meeting. It was a really good lineup. You had everyone there: Treloar from Australia, Gary Moon, and then all the top British boys as well. That must have been a great win.
Well, it was a great win and a great surprise, to be honest. I mean, I don't think I think we were lucky to scrape the final, and we just hadn't had quite the success through the qualifying heats we hoped for, and made the final. And nobody was more surprised than me to find us going into the first corner first.
Yeah, it was a great win, brilliant win.
But then you could hang on to it. Then once you obviously everybody was sort of behind you, sort of pushing to try and get through. But it's not always easy, especially at those sort of meetings. The Ace of Aces tracks were sometimes not the easiest track to overtake on. So I was very happy with that win.
Yeah, and then I think your last Aces was the following year, but it chucked it down with rain and. I think you had a problem at some point.
Yeah, one Aces I remember the hollow in the bottom of the track or in the middle of the track filled up with water. I can't remember if that was the 92 one or not.
Yeah, that's right. That was caused from a burst water pipe, I think, and not just the weather. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So one of the other things I've put on to ask you about, a bit cheekily really, you probably don't want to think about this, is that you sort of had a few serious accidents throughout your career, and there's one that I sort of talked to you about or prepared you for briefly, was the one at the Western Winner in 1990, and I said to you it's etched in my memory. Now I would have been 6 or 7 at that time, and I can still remember really clearly that accident happening. I remember it really frightening me. And obviously at that point I'd seen crashes before and things, but it was a terrifying accident, and it's on YouTube now as well. You can see it, and it's a horrifying accident really at the Western Winner. I don't know how much you remember of it really.
I do remember the meeting quite well up until that point. It was a fairly rough track as well. We had a couple of fairly big bumps in it, and which was making it difficult for most riders, I think, and a little bit dusty too. But I know that was the week before the Masters as well.
Yeah.
And or the first round of the Masters, and we were fairly happy with the new bike. It had been going well, and it had been getting better and better. And at the time, Steve Smith was the main competition we felt for the championship, because of course that would have been our fourth championship if we'd managed to win it. And the new bike, because it was a new frame we built, was starting to get better and better, and we were understanding how to ride it better and better. And that meeting was the final shakedown, really, before the first round of the Masters. And the accident was just unfortunate, I think. Really, I mean, we had a bad start, and we were running mid pack, I think, and it was just too dusty, and the outfit that we hit had broken down and was just coasting. I was trying to remember whose outfit it was. It's a Cornish guy. Chris Tyrrell, that's it, yes. And he was just obviously doing what he had to do, stay straight and coasting, broken down. And but then all of a sudden he just appeared in front of us, and by then we were on a straight bit, and I couldn't turn left enough to miss him, and our front wheel mounted his passenger tray, and that's what launched us off into space.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things, but it damaged our bike quite badly, and Dave was hurt too, and although he did try and race the following week at the Masters, we borrowed Dave Manning's frame, which is a Hagen frame.
Yeah.
And we put my engine in it, and it was going quite well, but Dave couldn't passenger me. So in the end, we got a second passenger who was a friend of Steve Smith's, who also unfortunately passed away a few years ago. So that's something which never really got us in a competitive position. And the second round we were again not particularly competitive, and I don't know where we ended up in the Masters, but it was probably 4th or 5th or 6th or something like that. But a shame really. And that bike was a very, very good bike, and I think probably one of our best bikes. And it was John Mitten was the passenger that first round, if you remember him. Yeah. But anyway,
another good passenger.
He was.
So that the outfit after the crash. So basically, I'll try and, if you haven't seen it, they're just coming off the corner. There's an enormous bump coming off the corner anyway. But then Chris Tyrrell, who was leading, or I think he was first or second, stopped, and then Steve and Dave have collided with the back of it, just like Steve described, and the bike takes off like nothing I've seen before. And then on the impact of the landing, it broke into about 3 pieces, didn't it? And threw you and Dave down the track. But I seem to remember a lot of people at the time, Steve, were sort of citing the machine. Obviously it was a revolutionary machine. It was very lightweight, and lots of people started to sort of criticise how the bike was built at the time.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's inevitable, isn't it? Really, I mean, bikes aren't built to withstand crashing. Really, I mean, it's like Formula One cars. I mean, they're fine as long as they're doing what they're supposed to do, but if they hit anything they're not supposed to, then they break.
Yeah.
And really that was what happened with the frame at the time. The headstock ripped off of the bike, and there was damage to the sidecar. We had actually a sort of like a composite sidecar tray, which actually wasn't that badly damaged. But it was damaged mainly to the headstock, which was irreparable. So we had to go back to a previous frame and rejig a previous frame from the previous year and carry on using that.
Right. So it never got rebuilt then, that one?
No, it was. We were into the season by then, and it took me a whole winter to build that bike, and so I just didn't have the time to try and rebuild it. It would have meant a new composite tray, and really a complete new front diamond, and probably more than a few other bits as well. So we just rejigged an old frame, transferred some pieces across, and ran that, which was fine. But it wasn't. I don't think it was how that frame could have been. That frame I felt was potentially going to be a marvellous frame. Yeah. But we never got the chance to fully prove it.
Yeah.
Shame.
It is a shame. Yeah, it was flying that day. But that's a funny word to say, isn't it? Given what happened, it was really very fast. You'd won your first couple of heats, I think, and then that happened. But I think you raced again after the incident. You raced obviously the week after, but you raced again in '91, won the Aces, still were at the top. Had some good rides at the Masters. Then '92 you rode again, I think. But then you sort of it came to an end, but you were still thought of as one of the best drivers in the country. You definitely retired at the top. What brought the retirement on?
I think Dave had been riding 25 years that year, and or the year we finished, and I sort of notched up 20 years because I started in '72 briefly. My kids were growing up, and I just thought, every weekend I'd drag them around Grasstracks, and although they loved it, I thought to myself, well, perhaps I should be spending a bit more time with them. My business was busy. I just felt it was the right time. And to be honest, I thought we'd had a few bad accidents, and the recovery had been slower. And I thought, well, maybe it's telling me something, age-wise, it's not you can't carry on forever. But looking at how some people are carrying on racing
I was just thinking
in
that.
50s and 60s, I mean, maybe I did stop too early.
Yeah.
A lot of our fans used to say, "Oh, come back, please come back racing."
Yeah.
Because we used to go to the grass tracks quite regularly, and they said, "Oh, you should be out there. You shouldn't be retired. You should get racing again." And but we never did. Well, I think we both agreed that it was the right time to stop, and we had lots of other things, lots of other interests we wanted to get on with, and so I think then racing took a bit of a backward step.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge commitment, and I think that people sort of realise that. But yeah, I was going to say, as you were talking then, I was thinking there's an awful lot of riders that raced during your time that still race now. There's also a lot of people that went, I think, what were you, around 40 were you when you retired?
41, I think.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who started their careers at 41. I'm thinking sort of some of the top riders now started their careers when you were retiring. But I think you're right. It's life situation, isn't it? I think that you have to sort of put other things first sometimes.
Yeah. Well, a lot was going on in my life as well. So there were a lot of things that were sort of pulling me in more than one direction. So I thought, well, maybe. We won the championships in the late 80s. We haven't won them in the early 90s yet. Maybe it's time to say enough's enough and do other things. But our interest has always stayed with Grasstrack, as you probably know, sort of. Dave's grandson, Kai Ward, is racing solos now, and he uses the number 4, and he was obviously something that Dave had been supporting in the last couple of years. Yeah. And so we're hoping for good things for Kai. So that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. We like watching Kai at the moment. We've watched him closely in the Inters, and then he's now into the 250s, and 2 of my co-hosts are 250 riders, so they have a lot of interest in Kai, because if it won't be long before they're beating him, he's beating them rather.
Yeah.
But you did make a comeback of sorts, sort of in more recent time. Obviously, one of your great rivals, Steve Smith, made several comebacks after you'd retired, and he was even nearly won the Masters again as recent as 2007. But you made a comeback for a while. You came back on the Sidecar Speedway.
I did, yes. That was something I really enjoyed. I don't think we had the equipment to be totally competitive. We were really struggling getting the engine running correctly. Carburation was a major problem, because obviously you had to pump your fuel from a low tank up to the carburetors. And we never really could sort out the carburation, and it just kept on 8-stroking a lot of the time when we were going around, coming out of bends, and although it would start well, that was it. And so I think in the end, I tried it for 2 or 3 seasons. In the end, we decided I decided not to bother, because it was taking up too much time. Again, I'd only recently started another business, and the trouble with Speedway is it took you away midweek quite often.
Yeah.
And then quite often it was a long way away. It was down the West Country, or there were never any local meetings.
No.
So it meant it virtually destroyed 2 days out of my working week, and I was trying to run a business. So in the end, I decided I can't do this anymore. Yeah. But I really did enjoy it. I thought, the spectacle of a stadium is where the spectators are really close to you, and quite often it's floodlit. I think it's a great atmosphere, and I really did enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably too late. I should have done that when I was younger as well.
Well, yeah, it's sort of taken off again now. And one of the things you said there about is the midweek, and lots of us said when they first started again, we can't be having these midweek meetings because people just can't make them. So they're trying to fix that, but obviously we're absolutely slaves to the promoters, unfortunately. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that, really. It's never too late, though, Steve. Never too late.
Well, I don't know about that now. Yeah, it's I enjoy watching it, so that's good enough for me, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
And something John Hiscock can do now as well. He's finally.
Yeah, first time for years he's not got a sidecar in the garage, so I don't know if he.
I know.
Don't know how long that's going to be before he gets one again, but he's into trials now. But
yeah, well, it's a bit of a Peter Pan, isn't it? I mean, so I think he'll have some sort of interest going for quite a long time yet.
Oh yeah, definitely. So talking of that's Sidecar Speedway, but talking of Grasstrack, you do still get to see a bit of Grasstrack nowadays, don't you? What's your thoughts on the current state of the sport?
Well, it's obviously there's not many competitors anymore, and the machinery has got very expensive, I suppose, and sophisticated. Fortunately, the multis now are lightweight multis, and so the weight of the bikes are more under control than when I experienced the multis when I raced twins. And I think the packages are really good. They're certainly the geometry of the bikes now are different to how I had them. They're more speedway related, really, with relaxed head angles and things like that. But they seem to go well. I think the geometry they've got now probably suits the types of engines that are being used. Okay. But it's not the way I would have had an outfit when I raced. But then I was racing V-twins, a different type of engine, different power unit, different power delivery. So I guess they've got the frames as they have them now because they work. Yeah. And they certainly look fast, that's for sure.
Yeah, they do. They look, it's got faster and faster, and it will continue to do so, I think, for a while. But I think that it's the Mark Costa effect reminded me. You're talking about the lean angle on the front headstock, and it reminded me when this has happened. It reminded me of when you went lightweight with everything. And everyone else suddenly went, well, not suddenly, but over a course of sort of 4 or 5 years, you went from these great big, V4 Honda things to much smaller machines. And then we've seen the same thing. We've now got, the sort of more upright headstock now looks very old-fashioned. And I do wonder, and it's probably worth picking your brains, I wonder what the next development will be, really.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that as long as the 1,000 capacity stays and it doesn't reduce to say 600, then I can't really see a lot changing. I mean, the bikes do seem to be very stable. I do think they are still grossly overweight, but there again, I've always thought that with bikes. I always think they've been far too solidly built. But there again, if people are producing frames on a professional level, they're not going to build them very, very lightweight because, of course, they don't want any issues on falling apart for customers. And I built my bikes deliberately light because I was the only one who was riding them. So yeah. But yeah, I mean, they look lovely. I mean, some of the bikes are works of art, and obviously modern machining techniques mean that you can make some very beautiful brackets and head angles, headstocks, and components for the front forks. All looks lovely. Yeah. But there again, it's the way it is. And when you've got 200 brake horsepower at your disposal, I suppose weight isn't really the most important thing.
No, I think probably not on the thousands. I think that the sort of the main fastest riders, they don't seem to have the lightweight machines. But I know that Neil Owen, the mad Welshman Neil Owen, he ran your engine, I think, for a while, and he's all about lightweight because he is using that power unit that you used. So there is still that element about.
Yes, it is. And I mean, Steve Smith also raced it not that long ago, and always felt that it could win. But it's the gating that's the problem. I mean, when I stopped racing, I knew that we really had limited time on the V-twin purely because you just can't get to the first bend first, and it's too difficult to recover a position with so many powerful engines around you. Yeah. And when you think probably a V-twin is probably tops 115, 120 brake horsepower, and you're trying to compete against 190, 200 brake horsepower, it's a big deficit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So therefore you don't need to you don't need to worry so much about the weight factor. But as I said earlier on, it's nice to have the driver and the passenger weight being more influential on the weight of the bike, because then you can move the bike through the bend. I don't know what it's like now with these modern bikes, how they move through the corners, if you can actually influence them with your body weight so easily.
Yeah.
I'm sure the guys who are racing now could enlighten me.
Yeah, I think that something that is definitely influential is the it's more now, I think, the passenger getting off the back wheel than it's ever been. I think if you rode an outfit nowadays with all that power going to the ground, like you raced one perhaps in the 80s, I think you'd constantly be wheeling all the time. Whereas the passenger's job really is to get the weight off the back wheel and then don't put it back on the back wheel till it's time to, because otherwise, you see a lot of them lifting coming off the corners.
Well, that's true. I mean, the way Dave and I used to race was more about keeping weight on the back wheel to steady it in the corners, and really it wasn't so necessary to get right off the front because you were using nearly all your power you had all the time, and yeah, the style of sidecar racing has changed because of the power units, and maybe that's why they have the more relaxed head angles, because it technically gives a greater amount of tyre cross-sectional area on the track. So maybe that's why they do it, because it helps to keep the front end in when the bike's driving so hard.
Yeah, it would be, it has changed. I mean, I think the sport does change all the time. I think that, like I was saying, in the 80s, within 4 years, the bikes have changed. I think that probably at the moment we're at our slowest development stage. So we'll have to wait and see what the future holds, really. But the last thing I'd like to ask you, we've talked about Roger Measor and a little bit about Steve Smith, but of all the rivals you've had over the years of racing, who was your greatest rival?
That's a very difficult question. I think the greatest rival is the person you're trying to beat at the time. And obviously, in the years running up to the Masters, it was definitely Roger. But then after we'd won the Masters, and the guy to beat after the Masters was Steve Smith, and also prior to my Masters and prior to Roger, it was Steve Smith.
Yeah.
But there are so many great riders, even at a local level. I mean, I had some great races against a guy called Steve Todd, who I'm sure you know, and Ben Heath. We had some fantastic battles back in the Eastern Centre. We had a very strong Eastern Centre, so it was some brilliant racing. And those guys were difficult to beat. Dave Manning was another guy who was very, very good rider. The list goes on, really. On a national scene, I think everybody there were 20, 25 of us, maybe 30 of us competing at national level at the same meetings.
Yeah.
And they could all win. You mentioned a few people, Russell Ing, for example, who was a very, very competitive rider, and of course people coming through. Robbie Wilson started to really come good after I'd virtually stopped racing. Although he's not far off my age, I don't think. I keep reminding Robbie of that, and he tells me to shut up, I think. Yeah. But he's still racing competitively now too.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to see. But yeah, who's my greatest rival? I don't know. I don't know. I think, as I said earlier, I think at the time it's the person you're trying to beat.
Yeah.
And I would say my biggest battles were against Roger, because he was the guy I was trying to beat at the time.
Yeah. And I think that he was the one that pushed you on to get the success you had, I think. So that's my opinion is it's Roger. I've got great, my really early times. I'm only sort of 35, 36 nearly, so I can only barely remember it. But if it's still stuck in my mind that 5-year-old me used to like watching you race against Roger Measor, then obviously there was something in it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, it was good fun, and we all had a good laugh and off the track, everybody was good friends, and it was good fun. We had some great races in France, and we had some good fun as well, great fun. And it's just a shame that it's only a moment in your life, really, because you never like to forget those times.
No, and it's but it's an amazing thing that you achieved, Steve. You know, the fact that 30 years later, I'm ringing you up asking you to come onto a podcast to talk about what you achieved. It sort of defines your life a little bit, I suppose.
Well, it's kind of you to say so. I mean, it's nice to still be recognised and known at tracks. I mean, that's the amazing thing. Although the people who are recognising me are a similar age to myself. Yeah. Which is inevitable, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great sport to have been involved with, and I'm so pleased that all those years ago I progressed from being mechanic for Clyde to actually racing a bike.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for coming on, Steve. Obviously, last word probably just for Dave and Dave's family. I think that it's tough times as it is in the world at the moment, but he'll be sadly missed, won't he?
Yes, and it's just it's a shame with the coronavirus that we're unable to give him the send off that we were hoping. His funeral actually is tomorrow, Friday, and it's only close family because obviously of the restrictions. But certainly when life gets back to normal, we certainly will be holding a proper celebration of his life, and all his mates from the Grasstrack world will be more than welcome to attend. So that's something I'm looking forward to in the future, and I'm sure Dave will be looking down and appreciating it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we've also got the passenger award for the British Masters now is named in his honour, which I think is very fitting.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean that's brilliant news from Astra Club, allowing that to happen, and obviously also the ACU Grasstrack Racing Committee, and we have to thank also Graham Murray for helping get that organised, and because I wouldn't have known what to do, and yeah, it's a fitting tribute to one of the most fantastic people to have been on our racing scene, really, and a very special dear friend of mine.